So hello and welcome. My name is Lisa Shea, and today we're going to work on a watercolor illustrated pen and ink medieval style letter V. V is great for all sorts of names. V is in Vivi, V is in Victor, V is in Victoria. V is a lovely letter. So we got watercolor paper, we got pencil and eraser, we've got waterproof pen, and we've got watercolor paints and a brush. Alright, so letter V. There's a number of different ways that one could make a medieval style letter V. And I've done it in different styles in the past. Sometimes curvy, sometimes straight. So it depends what kind of mood you're in as to which way you want to draw it. What kind of a mood am I in today? Let's see. Thing is, you can't make it too curvy because then it starts to look like a U, and you want to make sure that it's clear that this is a V, which is a pointier version of a U. A little odd that we have two letters that look nearly exactly the same. But then again, I suppose we have an O and a Q, which look pretty much exactly the same too. So what do we want to do for the V? Let's start with the center. And just see what comes to mind. I'm thinking all sorts of curvy ideas, but again, I have to be careful that this doesn't morph into a U type of shape. Well, if I just mirror these, flare them out a little, maybe give it a more solid base. It's not quite. I suppose I could pull out the inside. I want to make the letters a little thicker. So as much as I like the inside thing, I don't want to make this any wider. So then I will pull the base up. Gives it room to be thicker now. Make the base a little flatter. Although I am thinking very tree-y thoughts. This is when you start working on something, you sort of get ideas for what you want to do with it. I am getting very much tree thoughts now. Alright. Well, we're going to go with the tree thoughts. I'm going to put it's coming down a little higher than I would want, but I don't want to make it too much lower because then I would put the V off of kilter. Alright, we'll just leave it there. We'll put something growing here that comes out like this. I'll have a blossom in there. We will have a V top here. A V top here. Alright, so if we got a flower there, think I'll put like that. No. So I'm going to try something different, but I suppose there's a reason I do the things I like to do. Just not liking that solid object in there. I'll do my little portholes. This is what I had wanted to do originally. Alright. We'll put a bird over here. A little curl. And put a flower coming up through these portholes. Couple little leaves. I'll have a little spider. We haven't had a spider before, I don't think. Little happy spider. Alright, we'll put some sort of a creature poking its head out of one of these portholes. Big eyes. Alright, so I think we've got a general shape for the idea for the letter V. So now that we've put that in pencil, it's time to do the pen stage. So we're going to paint this. This pen is a waterproof pen, so that when we get to the watercoloring stage, we do not smear it everywhere. I'm using a Sakura Jelly Roll 06. You can use whatever one you want. Just has to be waterproof. Alright, I've got the flower. My portholes. Alright, so we have to and it's good to be mindful when you are putting down the ink that the ink that you just put down is all wet. So be careful not to smear your hand or anything else into that still wet ink while it's drying. It may seem like it dries instantly, but it does not. I think this pen, which I've been using for quite a long while, is finally getting down to the end of an ink. It still looks like it has a little bit of ink in there. I think it is reaching the end of its life, but it has lasted an impressively long time, so. Alright, so I have now inked in the design. I'll give that a moment or two to dry. Now we are on to the watercolor stage. Now I think that I will do this with the burnt sienna. So hopefully the ink is dry. Try to start with the open areas to give the ink the last few moments to dry before I get close to them. Alright. So it's hopefully looking nice and woody slash tree-y. The brown color. Give it that natural feel. Work our way around the little portholes. Alright, so we're painting along the sides of the letter V. Working our way up. So always feel free to ask with questions. If you have questions for me, I'm happy to answer them. And what I'm offering here is a guideline. You can of course customize whatever colors you want. You can add in whatever extra shapes you'd like to use. Your painting is your own painting. All right. A little more color up here. All right. Now normally with these shapes I don't put a lot of shading into them because they're meant to be fairly two-dimensional objects, but with this being more of a tree kind of shape, I will put a little more shadowing into these nooks and crannies. Give it a tiny bit more sense that this is a three-dimensional tree kind of thing. I don't want to go too overboard. It's still an illustration of it and not some sort of a perfect representation of a realistic tree. But go a little bit in the tree direction. Give that more organic feel to it. Alright, we'll let that dry. So while that is drying, we can work on other non-adjacent parts. We'll get some of this green up. This is the perm green light. And we'll go for the leaves with that. Alright, so we got the green leaves filled in. Let's do a first pass at the spider, which I want to be gray. It might take a couple grays to get it dark enough. Alright. The bird I would like to be a light ultramarine blue. We have two ultramarine blues here and they're somehow very different in color. So we'll go with this one over here. Just sort of a milder one. The other one's very much like a neon. This one's a softer color, we'll say. Still very pretty. Alright. And if we're going to do that, let's make the flowers blue. So we'll start on the petals. You, in general, want to do the petals as separate little entities so that they look separate and don't just look like a giant mishmash of a single color. So if you're able to put in the petals, you'll put in 2 petals and then let them dry, and then put in a new 2 other petals and let them dry. Then that helps the flower maintain its shape. But you have to let them dry because otherwise they're just going to look like a giant blob. Alright, so it's a little blue bud down there. I'll put a little blue bud over here. Alright, so those are drying. Alright, a little more gray on the spider. I think I'll put a little more shading in with the tree bark. Just a little bit more dark in the nooks and on the undersides. You think about where the light, if the light's coming from the top right, where the light is casting shadows in here, which would be in all the undersides of things. Under here as well. Got some tree bark kind of texture. Alrighty. Alright, and then I want this holes area. See, I don't want it to smear out into the surrounding wood, so I'm hoping that the area that's right around these portholes is dried enough that it's not going to spread this out. I want that to be a darker brown color in essence. And this is a Royal Langle raw umber. Alright, well so far the color is not smearing out into the surrounding bark, so that is good. Always a bit of a challenge when you paint this quickly. You don't necessarily give things full drying time, but that is going well. I try to just paint over some of these extra white spots so you don't have those little bright white highlights in what should be dark holes. There we go. For some reason this top one is just looking a little lighter than the rest. There we go. Alright, we want this little owl face thing to be different than the rest so that it stands out a little more. What we can do is mix in some of this yellow ochre, a little bit of copper, and then try to paint around these eyes. Now, on one hand, I could get a tinier brush, but the tip of my normal brush is nice and small. And I'm just comfortable enough with this one, since I use it all the time, that I would rather do that. And it looks like I was able to save the eyeballs as white. So that is good. Alright, so while that is all drying, I'm going to use a clean, damp brush and just dab a little at the bird head, which is going to lift up the color a little while this is still drying, and just make the bird head a little lighter than the rest of the body, just to give him a little bit of contrast. And I think I'll do the same with the tail. Just want it to be a little lighter. Alright, so rinse that off. And while I'm working with the blues, go back into my blue and add another pair of petals. Again, I want them to be separate from the existing petals so that it doesn't just look like a blob of blue, but that these look like individual parts of the flower. And so once we're doing these on different passes, some of them will be a little darker, some of them will be a lighter, and that's good because it will add to that sense of individuality. All right. Fix the belly of the bird. We carve out a little wing. We'll see if that stays. You can see on the bird that the other paint sort of merged back into the places where we brought it out a little bit. There's still a bit of differentiation in there, which is what we're going for. We're not going for anything too wild. Alright, on the owl head, I think I'd like to brighten it even a little more so it stands out a little better. We don't want it to be glaring out against the rest of the trunk, but we want it to be sort of visible. So I think I'm going to switch over to this gold, which is a bit of a brighter color, and just dab into the owl face a little bit. Alright, It's still going to blend in with the rest of the trunk of the V, but that is all right. I could put more things into the flowers, but you don't want to go too wild with the details because then it starts to get cluttered. And normally I would put little gold dots along the edges, but that may also get it to look a bit cluttered. Where right now it looks like it's already got a lot of different things going on in there between the vines and the flower and the birds and everything else. So maybe adding extra little rows of dots would just be way too much. Alright, but we'll just little gold centers on the flowers. Alright. I'm going to put little black dots. Normally I would do this with paint, but they're going to be so teeny. It's going to be hard enough to get little dots in there as it is. For the eyeballs, we'll give another pass at trying to get that bird head a little lighter. Maybe it has dried enough now, so I'm just using a clean brush, sort of like a sponge. Just scrub away a little bit at the head. Aim is just to lighten the head up a little bit, lighten the tail up a little bit. And just make a little wing shape in here. We'll see if that all fills back in. It'll fill in a little because that blue is still fairly wet over there, but I think that might stay enough to make the tiny bit of differentiation that I am hoping for. All right. Well, and let's sign it. Just trying to get the little eraser bits off of this. Alright, so we have a letter V for Vivi, Victoria, Victor, all sorts of V names. Let me know if you have any questions or comments or other notes about any of these letters. I am happy to help.